Have you ever noticed that some people seem to age differently than others? Not in the superficial sense of fewer wrinkles or less gray hair, but in the way they move, the clarity in their eyes, the ease with which they rise from a chair or recall a memory from decades past. We tend to assume these differences come down to genetics, to luck in the lottery of birth. But when you look closely at the people who maintain their vitality into their ninth decade and beyond, a different story emerges. The secret, if you can call it that, is not written in their DNA. It is written in the patterns of their daily lives, in choices made so consistently over so many years that they have become invisible, even to the people making them. And this raises a question worth sitting with for a moment. What if the architecture of a long life is something we can begin building at any age? Not with dramatic interventions, but with a quiet understanding of how our bodies were designed to live. You are listening to the Longevity Library, where we archive the wisdom of healthy aging. The architecture of a long life. Patterns, principles, and the art of growing older well. There is a particular stillness that settles over a house in the early morning hours, before the demands of the day begin to assert themselves. In many parts of the world, this is when the oldest among us are already awake, already moving, already engaged in the quiet rituals that have structured their lives for decades. It is tempting to look at someone who has reached their ninth decade with vitality and assume they possess some rare genetic gift, some piece of luck that the rest of us were simply not given. But when you begin to look closely at how such individuals actually live, a different picture emerges. What becomes visible is not luck at all, but pattern. Not mystery, but architecture. The question of how to grow old well is one of the oldest human inquiries. And yet, for all our modern interest in longevity, we tend to look for answers in the wrong places. We search for a single supplement, a specific diet, a revolutionary treatment that will unlock the door to a longer life. But the people who actually live long, healthy lives rarely seem to be searching for anything at all. They are simply living according to rhythms and principles that have been woven into their daily existence for so long that they no longer require conscious thought. The architecture of their lives was built slowly, brick by brick, and it is this structure, not any single miracle, that supports them as the decades pass. What follows is an exploration of that architecture. Not a prescription, not a set of commands to be followed, but an examination of the patterns that appear consistently among those who maintain vitality into advanced age. These are observations drawn from studying how people actually live, what they actually eat, how they actually move, and the principles that seem to guide their days. The goal is not to create a checklist, but to understand a philosophy. Because longevity, when you study it closely, reveals itself to be less about any specific action and more about a coherent way of being in the world. Part 1. The question of why we age. Before examining how some people seem to age more slowly than others, it is worth considering what aging actually is. This is not merely a philosophical exercise. Understanding the basic mechanisms of aging helps make sense of why certain lifestyle patterns appear so consistently among those who live long, healthy lives. At its simplest level, aging is the gradual loss of the body's ability to maintain itself. A young body is constantly repairing damage, clearing out cellular debris, and regenerating tissues. As the decades pass, these processes become less efficient. Damage accumulates. Systems that once worked in seamless coordination begin to show friction. This is not a disease, though it increases vulnerability to disease. It is simply the natural consequence of being alive in a physical body. Researchers have identified several key processes that appear to drive this age-related decline. One is inflammation, the body's natural response to injury or threat. In youth, inflammation is a targeted, temporary response that resolves once the threat is gone. But as we age, many people develop a low-grade, chronic inflammation that persists throughout the body, quietly damaging tissues over years and decades. This is different from the acute inflammation of a sprained ankle. It is systemic, invisible, and relentless. Another process involves the energy-producing structures inside our cells, the mitochondria. These tiny organelles convert the food we eat into the energy our cells need to function. Over time, they become less efficient. They produce less energy and more waste. Cells that cannot generate enough energy cannot perform their specialized functions, whether that means a muscle cell contracting, a brain cell firing, or an immune cell responding to a threat. Then there is the question of what happens to our proteins. Proteins are the workhorses of the body, performing countless tasks that keep us alive. But proteins can become damaged or misshapen, and when they do, they need to be cleared away and replaced. This quality control system becomes less effective with age. Damaged proteins accumulate, clumping together in ways that interfere with normal cellular function. There are other processes as well, involving our DNA, our chromosomes, the communication systems between cells. But what matters for this discussion is not the exhaustive list, but the pattern that emerges. Aging is a multifaceted process of accumulated damage and declining repair capacity. Anything that increases damage or impairs repair accelerates aging. Anything that reduces damage or supports repair may slow it down. This is where the patterns of daily life become relevant. Every choice we make, every habit we repeat, either adds to the burden of damage or supports the body's repair systems. The food we eat either provides raw materials for maintenance or introduces substances that must be managed. The way we move either strengthens our systems or wears them down. The way we rest either allows repair to occur or deprives the body of the time it needs to do its work. The people who maintain vitality into old age are not necessarily doing anything exotic. They are simply living in ways that, over decades, tip the balance in favor of repair over damage. They have built lives that work with their biology rather than against it. And while their specific practices vary across cultures and individuals, the underlying principles are remarkably consistent. Part 2. The principle of daily movement. One of the most consistent observations about long-lived populations is that they move constantly, but they rarely exercise in the way we typically understand the term. They do not necessarily go to gyms. They do not follow workout videos or track their heart rate zones. Instead, movement is simply woven into the fabric of their day. Consider what this looks like in practice. In the early morning, before the world is fully awake, there is walking. Not a power walk with measured strides and arm pumps, but a steady, purposeful walk that covers ground. This is not exercise for the sake of exercise. It is transportation. It is habit. It is simply what one does to begin the day. The distance covered might be several kilometers, but it does not feel like a workout. It feels like morning. Throughout the day, this pattern continues. When sitting, there is an awareness of posture, a gentle engagement of the core that turns passive sitting into active stability. When standing, there might be small movements, shifting weight, rising onto the balls of the feet. When watching television or talking on the phone, there is pacing, circling, never quite settling into complete stillness. The body is not allowed to go dormant. This constant low-level activity has effects that are both immediate and cumulative. At the immediate level, it keeps blood moving, delivers oxygen to tissues, and maintains the metabolic processes that depend on muscle contraction. Muscles that are used regularly, even at low intensity, send signals to the body that they are needed. The body responds by maintaining them, by keeping the cellular machinery for muscle protein synthesis ready to function. At the cumulative level, This pattern of movement prevents the slow decline that comes from prolonged sitting. Research has increasingly shown that extended periods of inactivity have effects that exercise alone cannot fully reverse. Someone who exercises for 30 minutes but sits for the remaining 15 and a half waking hours is still, metabolically speaking, largely sedentary. The body interprets prolonged sitting as a signal that movement is not required, and it begins to downregulate the systems that depend on movement. This is why the pattern of constant, low-level activity is so powerful. It sends a continuous signal to the body that movement is the baseline state, not an exception. The enzymes that break down fats in the bloodstream, for example, are activated by muscle contraction. When muscles are idle for hours, these enzymes become less active, and fats linger longer in the blood after meals. Small movements throughout the day keep these systems primed. For someone in their 50s or beyond, adopting this principle does not require a complete overhaul of daily life. It simply requires attention to the moments when the body goes still. Can a phone call be taken while standing and pacing? Can a television program be watched while doing gentle stretching or walking in place? Can a short walk be added after meals? When blood sugar is naturally rising and muscle activity can help clear it from the bloodstream. These are not dramatic interventions. They are small adjustments that, repeated thousands of times over years, reshape the body's relationship with movement. There is also the question of posture and the way it changes with age. Watch young children sit on the floor, and you will see them fold easily. Their spines flexible, their hips open. Watch older adults rise from a chair, and you may see hesitation, stiffness, a need to use the arms for leverage. Much of this decline is not inevitable. It is the result of years of sitting in ways that shorten some muscles and weaken others, of moving in limited ranges of motion that never challenge the body's full capacity. The simple practice of sitting with the spine long and the core lightly engaged, of rising from a chair without using the hands, of walking with awareness of how the foot meets the ground. These are forms of movement maintenance. They preserve the body's range of motion and the neural pathways that coordinate complex movement. They are not exercises in the conventional sense, but they may be more important than any structured workout. Part 3. The principle of strategic eating. When examining how long-lived individuals eat, what emerges is not a single diet, but a set of principles that can be adapted to many different cuisines and preferences. The foods themselves may vary dramatically from one culture to another, but the underlying patterns are remarkably consistent. The first and most visible pattern is the emphasis on variety, particularly in the plant foods consumed. A single meal might include several different vegetables, each contributing a different set of nutrients and plant compounds. This is not accidental. Different colored plants contain different families of phytonutrients, compounds that plants produce to protect themselves and that appear to offer protective effects when consumed by humans. A diet that includes leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, root vegetables, mushrooms, and sea vegetables provides a range of these compounds that no single food could match. This variety extends to the preparation methods as well. Some vegetables are eaten raw, preserving heat-sensitive nutrients and enzymes. Others are cooked gently, which can break down cell walls and make certain nutrients more absorbable. Still others are fermented, a process that transforms them in ways that raw or cooked foods cannot replicate. Fermentation deserves particular attention because it appears so consistently across long-lived populations. In Japan, there is natto, miso, and a remarkable range of pickled vegetables. In Korea, there is kimchi. In Eastern Europe, there are fermented dairy products and pickled vegetables. In many traditional cultures, fermentation was simply a method of preservation, a way to extend the life of seasonal foods through the winter. But the result? whether intended or not, was the creation of foods that actively support the digestive system. The fermentation process involves microorganisms, typically bacteria or yeasts, that consume the sugars in the food and produce compounds that preserve it. In the process, they also produce beneficial bacteria, the probiotics that can colonize the digestive tract. They break down compounds that might otherwise interfere with nutrient absorption. They can even create new nutrients, such as certain B vitamins, that were not present in the original food. For the digestive system, these fermented foods appear to serve multiple functions. They introduce beneficial bacteria that can help crowd out less desirable species. They provide compounds that support the integrity of the intestinal lining. They may even influence the immune system, which is closely linked to the health of the digestive tract. Given that the gut is home to a significant portion of the body's immune cells, supporting its health has effects that extend far beyond digestion. Another consistent pattern is the emphasis on protein, particularly at certain meals. The body's ability to maintain muscle mass depends on a steady supply of amino acids, the building blocks of protein. But the body does not store amino acids the way it stores fat or carbohydrates. It needs a regular supply throughout the day. This is where meal timing becomes important. A common pattern in modern eating is a small breakfast, a moderate lunch, and a large dinner that contains the majority of the day's protein. But research on muscle protein synthesis suggests that this may not be optimal. The process of building new muscle tissue appears to be triggered most effectively when protein is consumed in moderate amounts spread across the day. A large amount of protein at one meal does not produce a proportionally larger response. The excess amino acids are simply converted to other uses or eliminated. The pattern seen in many long-lived populations is different. Breakfast includes protein, often from fermented soy or eggs or dairy. Lunch includes a moderate amount of protein, but is kept light to avoid the energy slump that can follow a heavy meal. Dinner includes a substantial serving of protein, providing the amino acids needed for overnight repair. This distribution ensures that muscle tissue receives a steady supply of building materials throughout the 24-hour cycle. There is also the question of what protein sources are chosen. Animal proteins appear frequently, often in the form of fish and occasionally poultry or eggs. But plant proteins are also prominent, particularly soy in its various forms. A diet that includes both animal and plant proteins provides a wider range of amino acids and other nutrients than either source alone. Fish, in particular, appears consistently, providing not only protein but also the long-chain omega-3 fats that support the structure of cell membranes throughout the body, including in the brain. The principle of lightness at midday is worth examining separately. A heavy lunch, particularly one rich in refined carbohydrates, produces a sharp rise in blood sugar followed by an insulin surge that can drive blood sugar down again, often below baseline. This is the familiar afternoon slump, the drowsiness and brain fog that many people experience in the hours after lunch. It is not a sign of laziness or poor character. It is a predictable physiological response to a meal that overwhelms the body's glucose regulation systems. A lighter lunch, by contrast, produces a gentler rise in blood sugar and avoids the subsequent crash. Energy remains steady throughout the afternoon. The digestive system is not burdened with a large volume of food to process while also trying to support physical and mental activity. This pattern aligns with the body's natural rhythms, which include a dip in alertness in the early afternoon, but not the deep crash that follows a heavy meal. The evening meal, in contrast, is often substantial. This makes physiological sense. The overnight fast is the longest period the body goes without food, providing a meal that includes protein, vegetables, And some complex carbohydrates ensures that the body has the raw materials it needs for the repair processes that occur during sleep. Protein synthesis, the building and repair of tissues, happens most actively during rest. Having amino acids available from the evening meal supports this process. There is also the question of what is not eaten. In the dietary patterns of long-lived populations, highly processed foods are rare. Foods that are stripped of their natural fiber and concentrated into forms that deliver rapid glucose spikes are not staples. Sugary drinks, refined grains stripped of their bran and germ. Processed meats preserved with compounds that may be problematic. These appear infrequently, if at all. This is not necessarily a moral stance against processed foods. It is simply that traditional diets were built around whole foods, and many long-lived individuals have simply continued eating the way they always have. Part 4. The principle of metabolic balance. Underlying the patterns of eating and movement is a deeper principle, one that has to do with how the body manages energy. This is the question of metabolic health, and it may be the single most important factor in how we age. Metabolism is the sum total of all the chemical processes that keep us alive. The conversion of food into energy, the building and breaking down of tissues, the elimination of waste products. When metabolism is functioning well, the body can handle the fluctuations of daily life, the influx of food after a meal, the demands of physical activity, the periods of rest and repair. When metabolism becomes inflexible, these normal fluctuations become stresses. One key aspect of metabolic health is the body's ability to handle carbohydrates, specifically glucose. After a meal containing carbohydrates, glucose enters the bloodstream. The pancreas releases insulin, which signals cells to take up this glucose for energy or storage. In a metabolically healthy person, this system operates smoothly. Blood sugar rises modestly and returns to baseline within a couple of hours. Cells remain sensitive to insulin's signal, responding appropriately. But this system can become strained when meals consistently deliver large amounts of glucose, particularly in forms that enter the bloodstream quickly. Insulin must work harder. Cells can become less responsive to its signal, a condition known as insulin resistance. The pancreas produces more insulin to compensate. Blood sugar remains higher for longer after meals. This state, even before it reaches the level diagnosed as diabetes, has consequences throughout the body. Chronically elevated insulin levels signal the body that energy is abundant. This shifts metabolism towards storage rather than burning. It makes it harder to access stored fat for energy between meals. It promotes inflammation. It stresses the mitochondria, the energy producers in cells. Over years and decades, this pattern accelerates many of the processes we associate with aging. The dietary patterns observed in long-lived populations tend to protect metabolic health in several ways. Meals are structured to avoid large glucose spikes. When carbohydrates are eaten, they are typically accompanied by fiber, protein, and fat, all of which slow the absorption of glucose. The result is a gentler rise in blood sugar and a more moderate insulin response. The practice of eating a light lunch and a substantial dinner also affects metabolism. The body's sensitivity to insulin follows a daily rhythm, typically being higher in the morning and lower in the evening. A large meal late in the day, when insulin sensitivity is lower, produces a larger glucose spike than the same meal eaten earlier. This is one reason why meal timing matters independently of what is eaten. Physical activity also plays a crucial role in metabolic health. Muscle tissue is a major consumer of glucose. When muscles contract, they can take up glucose without requiring insulin. This is why movement after meals is so effective at blunting glucose spikes. A short walk after eating gives muscles an opportunity to clear glucose from the bloodstream. reducing the demand on the insulin system. Over time, maintaining metabolic health creates a virtuous cycle. Cells remain sensitive to insulin. Energy levels remain steady throughout the day. The body can switch easily between burning glucose and burning fat, depending on what is available. This metabolic flexibility is a hallmark of healthy aging. The ability to adapt to whatever fuel is available rather than being locked into one mode. Part 5. The principle of digestive vitality. The digestive system deserves special attention because it sits at the intersection of so many aspects of health. It is where food becomes fuel, where nutrients are extracted from the environment and incorporated into the body. It is also a major interface with the outside world, a long tube that runs through the body but is technically outside it, lined with cells that must distinguish friend from foe. The community of microorganisms that inhabits the digestive tract, the microbiome, is now understood to play a role in health that extends far beyond digestion. These bacteria influence the immune system, which must learn to tolerate them while remaining ready to attack true pathogens. They produce compounds that affect inflammation throughout the body. They even communicate with the brain through various pathways, influencing mood and behavior. What supports a healthy microbiome is becoming clearer. Diversity matters. A microbiome with many different species appears to be more resilient and more beneficial than one dominated by a few. This diversity is supported by eating a wide variety of plant foods, which provide different types of fiber that feed different bacterial species. It is also supported by the regular consumption of fermented foods, which introduce new beneficial bacteria directly. The traditional practice of including fermented foods at multiple meals makes sense in this light. Each serving provides a fresh influx of beneficial bacteria. Each type of fermentation introduces different bacterial strains. Over time, this regular seeding helps maintain a diverse and robust microbial community. There is also the question of what damages the microbiome. Antibiotics, when necessary, are life-saving, but they are not selective. They kill beneficial bacteria along with harmful ones. A diet low in fiber starves beneficial bacteria, causing their populations to shrink. Highly processed foods may contain compounds that directly inhibit certain bacterial species. Chronic stress also appears to affect the microbiome, probably through the many connections between the nervous system and the digestive tract. For someone in their 50s or beyond, supporting digestive vitality does not require drastic measures. It can be as simple as including a serving of fermented food each day, whether that is yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, or another traditional fermented food. It means eating a variety of plant foods to provide different types of fiber. It means being mindful of antibiotic use, taking them when necessary, but also taking steps to repopulate the microbiome afterward. The digestive system also benefits from the same patterns of movement that support other aspects of health. Gentle physical activity stimulates the natural contractions that move food through the digestive tract. The practice of walking after meals, common in many cultures, supports this process. It also helps distribute blood flow appropriately, not diverting too much to the digestive system at the expense of other tissues, but not leaving the digestive system struggling either. Part 6. The principle of rest and recovery. In the modern world, rest is often viewed as the absence of activity, a blank space to be filled if possible. But in the architecture of a long life, rest is as active a process as movement, and just as essential. Sleep is the most obvious form of rest, and its importance to health is difficult to overstate. During sleep, the brain engages in housekeeping processes that cannot happen during waking hours. Fluids flow through the spaces between brain cells, clearing away metabolic waste products that accumulate during the day. Memories are consolidated. Experiences are processed. Learning is integrated. The body repairs tissues, synthesizes proteins, and releases hormones that regulate growth and appetite. The patterns of sleep in long-lived populations often differ from the modern ideal of 8 uninterrupted hours. In many traditional societies, sleep was more flexible, often including a period of rest during the afternoon and a later bedtime. What matters may be less the exact schedule and more the consistency and quality of rest. A body that is allowed to complete its sleep cycles without interruption, that is not chronically deprived of sleep, is a body that can perform its maintenance functions fully. Beyond sleep, there is the question of rest throughout the day. The body operates in rhythms, cycles of activity and recovery that repeat throughout the 24-hour day. Pushing through these rhythms, ignoring the signals that say rest is needed, may temporarily increase productivity, but at a cost. The stress response is activated, cortisol rises, and the body shifts into a different mode of operation, one optimized for short-term survival rather than long-term maintenance. The practice of taking a moment of rest after a meal, common in many cultures, aligns with these rhythms. The body directs blood flow toward the digestive system after eating. A period of rest allows this process to proceed without competition from other demands. This is not laziness. It is simply respecting the body's need to allocate resources appropriately. There is also rest that is not sleep, but is deeper than wakefulness. The state achieved through practices that calm the nervous system. This might be meditation, but it might also be simply sitting quietly, gazing at a natural scene, engaging in a repetitive manual activity that occupies the hands without demanding constant attention. These practices activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch of the nervous system responsible for rest and repair. They lower heart rate, reduce blood pressure, and shift the body away from the stress response. For someone in the second half of life, the ability to rest deeply may be as important as the ability to move vigorously. The two are linked. Without adequate rest, the body cannot repair the damage caused by activity. Without activity, the body does not generate the signals that maintain muscle and bone. Health exists in the balance between them. Part 7. The principle of consistency. If there is a single principle that underlies all the others, it is consistency. The patterns observed in long-lived individuals are not dramatic interventions undertaken for a short period. They are habits practiced for decades, woven so deeply into daily life that they no longer require conscious effort. This is important because it shifts the focus from what to do to how to live. A diet followed for 6 months will have some effects, but it cannot replicate the cumulative impact of a lifetime of moderate, balanced eating. An exercise program started in retirement will produce benefits, but it cannot fully reverse the effects of decades of sedentary living. This is not a reason for despair, but a reason to think differently about the choices we make today. Every day presents opportunities to move, to eat in ways that support rather than strain, to rest adequately. Each of these choices, by itself, is insignificant. A single walk, a single meal, a single night of good sleep. None of these will determine the course of a life, but repeated thousands of times, they become the architecture that supports or fails to support us as the decades pass. This is why the specifics matter less than the pattern. Whether the protein comes from fish or beans, whether the fermented food is kimchi or sauerkraut, whether the movement is walking or gardening. These details can be adapted to individual preferences and circumstances. What matters is the presence of protein at most meals, the regular inclusion of fermented foods, the integration of movement throughout the day, the respect for rest. The people who live long, healthy lives are not necessarily following the latest research or optimizing their biomarkers. They are simply living according to traditions and habits that have proven themselves over generations. They eat what their grandparents ate. They move the way people have always moved. They rest when they are tired. They do not overcomplicate it. This simplicity can be frustrating to those looking for a secret, a key that will unlock longevity without requiring fundamental changes to how they live. But the absence of a secret is itself the message. There is no single food, no single supplement, no single practice that will compensate for a life lived at odds with the body's needs. The architecture must be built from many materials, laid brick by brick over many years. Part 8. Integrating the principles. The challenge, then, is not to adopt a list of practices, but to integrate them into a coherent way of living. This integration is where the principles reveal their connections. Consider how movement affects metabolism. When muscles contract regularly, they remain sensitive to insulin. They clear glucose from the bloodstream efficiently after meals. This reduces the stress on the pancreas and helps maintain metabolic flexibility. The same movement that strengthens muscles also protects against the metabolic disturbances that accelerate aging. Consider how diet affects inflammation. A diet rich in plant foods provides compounds that help regulate the inflammatory response. Fermented foods support a healthy gut microbiome, which in turn influences immune function throughout the body. The same foods that provide nutrients also help modulate the chronic, low-grade inflammation that damages tissues over time. Consider how rest affects repair. During deep sleep, the body releases growth hormone, which stimulates tissue repair and protein synthesis. The amino acids provided by the evening meal become the raw materials for this repair. Sleep and diet work together, each enabling the other. Consider how all of these affect the nervous system. Regular movement, balanced meals, and adequate rest all support the regulation of the stress response. They keep the nervous system from becoming stuck in a state of chronic alert, which would itself accelerate aging through the effects of stress hormones on tissues throughout the body. The integration of these principles creates a system where each part supports the others. Movement improves metabolic health, which supports energy levels for more movement. Diet provides the raw materials for repair, which enables the body to recover from activity. Rest allows repair to occur, which prepares the body for the next day's activity. It is a cycle, not a list. For someone in their 50s or beyond, the question is not whether to start this cycle, but where to enter it. Some may find it easiest to begin with movement, adding short walks to their daily routine. Others may find that adjusting their meals, perhaps adding a serving of fermented food or redistributing protein across the day, feels more accessible. Still others may need to focus first on sleep, addressing the factors that interfere with rest. Any entry point is valid, because each improvement will support the others. Part 9. The question of purpose. There is one more pattern that appears consistently among those who maintain vitality into advanced age. Though it is harder to measure than diet or movement, it has to do with purpose, with having reasons to get up in the morning, with being engaged in life rather than merely enduring it. This is not the same as being busy. It is possible to fill days with activity without having any sense of purpose. What appears to matter is having something that matters, some reason for being that extends beyond oneself. For some, this is family, the desire to be present for grandchildren or great-grandchildren. For others, it is work, even if that work is no longer paid. For still others, it is a craft, a garden, a community role, something that calls them forward. The physiological effects of purpose are not fully understood, but there are plausible mechanisms. Having a reason to engage with life may buffer against stress, providing perspective that prevents daily frustrations from becoming overwhelming. It may motivate the behaviors that support health, the effort required to move and eat well and rest adequately. It may simply make life worth living, which is itself a form of health that cannot be measured in biomarkers. The people who live longest and healthiest are rarely those who have retired from life. They are those who have found ways to remain engaged, to contribute, to matter. The 92-year-old teaching fitness classes is not doing so because she needs the money. She is doing it because it gives her a reason to be in the world, a role to play, people who depend on her. That may be as important as any food she eats or any exercise she performs. Part 10. A calm conclusion. The architecture of a long life is not built in a day. It is built in the small choices repeated over decades. The morning walks, the meals that include a variety of plants, the moments of rest, the reasons for getting up. It is not dramatic or exciting. It is simply the accumulated weight of countless decisions that align with how the body was designed to live. There is no guarantee. Of course, genetics play a role. Accidents happen. Diseases can strike regardless of how carefully one lives. But the patterns described here are not about guarantee. They are about probability, about tilting the odds in favor of health, about building a structure that can withstand the inevitable stresses of life. For those in the second half of life, the question is not whether it is too late to start. It is never too late to begin building. The body responds to better treatment at any age, though the response may be slower and the ceiling lower than it would have been decades earlier. Every healthy meal, every walk, every good night of sleep is a brick added to the architecture. Even if the foundation was laid haphazardly, the structure can still be reinforced. The goal is not to live forever. That is not possible, and pursuing it leads only to frustration. The goal is to live fully for as long as one lives, to maintain the capacity to do what matters, to be present for the people and activities that give life meaning. The architecture described here supports that goal. It does not promise immortality. It promises only that the years available will be lived as well as they can be. In the end, this may be enough. To wake in the morning and move through the day with energy. To eat meals that nourish rather than burden. To rest deeply at night. To have reasons for being here. These are not small things. They are the substance of a life well lived, whether that life spans 7 decades or 10. The architecture supports the life, but the life itself is what matters. The architecture is only there to make it possible. The architecture of a long life is not built in a day, and it does not require perfection. It requires only that we understand the principles that have supported human health for generations, and that we apply them consistently, patiently, without expecting miracles. The goal is not to live forever, but to live fully for as long as we are here, to maintain the capacity to do what matters, to be present for the people and activities that give life meaning. If this conversation has prompted you to think differently about your own patterns, we would be honored to hear your reflections in the comments. And if you would like to continue exploring the wisdom of healthy aging, we invite you to browse the other films in this library and to subscribe so that you do not miss the next one. This is the Longevity Library. Listen, learn, and live longer.